In the quiet town of Ravensbrook, a strange event occurred every autumn-exclusive masquerade ball held at Blackthorn Manor, perched ominously on the edge of a dense forest. The invitations were rare, handwritten in red ink, and always delivered at twilight. Those who received them knew better than to refuse. This year, Isabel, a young journalist with a penchant for unraveling mysteries, received one of those crimson letters. The timing was perfect, as rumors had been swirling about the secretive nature of the ball, with whispers of eerie happenings and disappearances tied to it. Her editor had long dismissed them as folklore, but Isabel knew there was more. This was her chance to investigate. On the night of the ball, the manor loomed large and silent, its windows glowing faintly with golden light. Isabel approached, her black dress flowing like shadows around her. A silver mask, shaped like a delicate vampire's face with sharp, angular features, covered her eyes. She wasn't alone. Dozens of other guests were arriving, all masked similarly with fangs, blood-red eyes, and faces molded to resemble predatory elegance. The atmosphere was thick with unease, but none dared speak of it. As Isabel entered the ballroom, her senses heightened. The air was rich with the scent of candle wax, old wood, and something faintly metallic blood, perhaps. The guests moved about the floor, speaking in whispers, their laughter hollow and unsettling. The masked faces gave them an inhuman quality, and the flickering lights only deepened the effect. There was something asterisk about the party-goers. Their movements were too graceful, their eyes too watchful beneath their masks. Isabel felt as though she had walked into a trap but couldn't leave not yet. She noticed a man standing in the corner, his mask much more elaborate than the others, adorned with intricate details that made the vampire's face look almost alive. His eyes locked onto hers, piercing through the mask she wore. The night pressed on with strange performances, dancers who spun in dizzying circles, their feet never seeming to touch the floor, and musicians who played haunting melodies that seemed to vibrate through the bones of the guests. As Isabel moved through the crowd, she began to hear murmurs, barely audible, like voices behind a closed door. She ventured deeper into the manor, away from the ballroom. In a dimly lit hallway, she found a heavy door slightly ajar. Pushing it open, she stepped into a room lined with mirrors. In each reflection, the figures of masked guests could be seen, but they weren't human. Their eyes gleamed like animals in the dark, and their mouths, hidden behind the fangs of the masks, were stretched into sinister smiles. Isabel's own reflection didn't look right either. Her mask had fused to her face, the edges blurring as if it were becoming part of her skin. Before she could flee, the man with the elaborate mask appeared behind her. His voice was soft, a cold breath against her neck. "You've come far too deep, Isabel." She spun around, heart racing. "Who are you?" The man removed his mask, revealing a face that wasn't entirely human, pale skin, sharp features, and eyes that gleamed with hunger. "This is no ordinary masquerade. The masks are not merely for show." He leaned in closer, whispering, "They change you, make you one of us." As he spoke, Isabel felt a creeping sensation across her face. The mask was tightening, its fangs lengthening, merging with her own teeth. Panic surged through her as she backed away, her reflection in the mirror showing her transformation, her eyes now glowing a sickly red, her skin paling. The door to the room slammed shut behind her. "Welcome to the masquerade of shadows," the man said, his smile growing wider. "You'll never leave." Isabel tried to scream, but no sound escaped her lips. The music from the ballroom swelled, and she could hear the voices of the other guests growing louder, laughing, beckoning her to join them. Her vision blurred, and the last thing she saw was her own reflection, fully transformed, a creature of the night, trapped in a world of masks and shadows. The next morning, the townsfolk of Ravensbrook spoke of the strange mist that had rolled in overnight, how Blackthorn Manor stood silent once again. Isabel was never seen again, and the rumors only deepened. But every year, when the masquerade invitations went out, people whispered of her, of the new guest, always masked, always watching, her red eyes gleaming from the shadows. The invitations never stopped, and neither did the disappearances. The masquerade continued, waiting for its next unwitting guest to join the eternal dance. The intrigue of Blackthorn Manor and its masked guests still lingers, But what truly happens behind those closed doors? The townspeople can only speculate, but Isabel's fate remains an unsettling mystery. The autumn leaves had barely begun to fall when the invitations arrived again. Ravensbrook's townsfolk spoke in hushed tones, debating whether the eerie tradition should be allowed to continue. But even as they whispered, no one dared openly challenge the unseen forces behind the masquerade of shadows. The memory of Isabel's disappearance was still fresh in the air, but the town had learned to keep its distance from Blackthorn Manor except for the chosen few who could not refuse. Among them was Marcus, Isabel's younger brother. The townspeople had long urged him to forget, but he couldn't shake the feeling that his sister's disappearance wasn't a simple tragedy. He had grown obsessed, combing through her notes, reading every word she had written about the mysterious masquerade. When his own invitation arrived, he knew this was his chance. He would uncover the truth. On the night of the masquerade, Marcus dressed in an old suit and donned a simple black mask with sharp, skeletal features. As he approached Blackthorn Manor, the same oppressive atmosphere hung over the estate, its windows glowing like eyes watching his every move. His heartbeat quickened, but his resolve held firm. He wasn't here to dance, he was here to find Isabel. Inside the ballroom, the scene was much like the one Isabel had described. Dancers glided across the floor, their vampire masks glinting in the low candlelight. Laughter echoed eerily off the high walls, but Marcus noticed something different this time. The masks looked more alive than even Isabel had mentioned. The eyes behind them flickered unnaturally, and the mouths, hidden beneath layers of porcelain and paint, twitched in ways that no human face should. He scanned the room, looking for the man Isabel had described, the one with the intricate mask. But there were too many figures, too many shadows blending into the candlelit haze. Marcus felt a chill crawl down his spine, as if the walls were closing in. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw her. A figure stood at the edge of the ballroom, partially hidden behind a column. Her mask was delicate, made of silver like his sister's had been, but her eyes, they gleamed red, just as Isabel had written. His breath caught in his throat. Could it be her? He moved toward her, weaving through the crowd, but as he got closer, she slipped away, disappearing into one of the manor's dark hallways. Without hesitation, Marcus followed. The hallway twisted and turned, and the further he ventured, the more the sounds of the ballroom faded behind him. The air grew cold, the shadows deeper. His sister's figure seemed to float ahead of him, always just out of reach. His footsteps echoed in the silence, but hers made no sound at all. Isabel, Marcus called, his voice trembling. But there was no response, only the soft whisper of fabric against stone as she moved deeper into the manor. Finally, they reached a door massive, black, and carved with strange symbols that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. The figure in the silver mask paused, her hand resting on the door. For the first time, she turned to face him fully. It was Isabel, or at least a version of her. Her eyes were a bright and natural red, her skin deathly pale. But behind the mask, there was recognition, a flicker of her former self. Marcus, you shouldn't have come, she whispered, her voice hollow, strained. Isabel, he breathed, stepping forward. I'm here to take you home. Her expression shifted, pained. You can't. Not now. Not ever. She looked down at the mask she wore, her fingers trembling as she touched it. I'm part of this now. Part of ***. Before he could respond, the door behind her creaked open, revealing a massive chamber bathed in a sickly, pale light. Inside, Marcus saw rows of mirrors like the ones Isabel had written about. But this time, he saw what lay behind the reflections. The mirrors revealed the truth of the masquerade. The guests, all still dancing in the ballroom, were not human at all. Their masks had fused to their faces, their bodies twisted and grotesque. They were feeding on the energy of the night, and every step they took in the dance brought them closer to something ancient, something evil, waiting deep within the manor. You can't save me, Isabel said, her voice breaking, but you can still save yourself. Before Marcus could respond, a voice echoed from behind him, cold, familiar, and dripping with malice. No one leaves, Marcus. He turned slowly, and there stood the man Isabel had described, the one with the intricate mask. His face was the embodiment of a nightmare, half human, half beast, his fangs gleaming as he smiled. The masquerade is eternal. You've already begun the dance. Marcus tried to step back, but the door behind him slammed shut. The man advanced, his presence suffocating, filling the room with a darkness that seemed to bend the light around it. You came seeking answers, and now you'll have them, the man said, his voice low and menacing. But there's a price. Suddenly, Marcus felt the weight of his own mask. It was tightening against his skin, just as Isabel's had. His vision blurred, his heartbeat thundered in his ears, and his reflection in the mirrors began to change. His eyes, too, were turning red. No, he gasped, clawing at the mask, but it was no use. The transformation had begun. Isabel reached out, tears in her crimson eyes. I'm sorry, she whispered. I should have warned you. It's too late. Marcus's vision dimmed as the shadows closed in, but before everything went black, he heard the man's final words, spoken like a cruel promise. The masquerade never ends. And now, neither do you. And just like that, Marcus was lost. Yet, somewhere in the dark corners of the manor, where the candles flickered and the masks whispered their secrets, a new invitation was being written. Someone else would be chosen soon, drawn into the eternal dance. The masquerade continues, and its guests never truly leave. The darkness swallowed Marcus whole, and the ballroom's eerie music echoed through the depths of Blackthorn Manor. Time blurred as his transformation progressed. The mask had melded into his skin, an unbreakable fusion, sealing his fate. He could feel his humanity slipping away, replaced by something cold, predatory, and ancient. But somewhere deep within, a spark of resistance flickered. He couldn't let it end like this. He had come to save Isabel, and now, somehow, he had to save himself. In the chamber of mirrors, Isabel stood frozen, watching Marcus's slow descent into the cursed realm of the masquerade. Her eyes, once bright with life, were now dull, filled with regret. You can still fight it, she whispered, but if you give in, you'll become one of them forever. Marcus struggled to regain control, but the mask was relentless, feeding on his desperation. The man with the elaborate mask loomed closer, his voice now a low, hypnotic chant. You're already ours, Marcus. Accept it. Just as Marcus felt himself slipping completely, a sharp crash pierced the suffocating silence. One of the mirrors shattered, its jagged pieces clattering to the floor. Isabel had hurled a candelabra at it, her face filled with a mix of anguish and defiance. For a brief moment, the spell of the masquerade weakened. Marcus blinked, the red fading from his eyes, and the pull of the mask lessened. But then, from the broken mirror, something stirred. A figure stepped out of the shards, an emaciated, pale creature, its face contorted into an eternal grimace, its fingers long and sharp. It was not a reflection, but something far worse, a dark entity that had been trapped in the glass, and now it was free. The man with the intricate mask recoiled in shock, his cold composure finally breaking. No, not them, he hissed, backing away. The creature from the mirror moved with unnatural speed, lunging toward him. The ballroom's once elegant guests screeched in terror, their masks twisting into grotesque shapes as they fled. Marcus, seizing the moment, grabbed Isabel's hand. Come on, he urged, pulling her toward the broken mirror. This is our chance. Isabel hesitated, her gaze drifting toward the endless rows of mirrors, each one containing a nightmare waiting to be unleashed. It's not just us, she murmured, her voice trembling. There are more. Asterisk, so many more asterisk. But there was no time. The creature was tearing through the ballroom, devouring anything in its path. The man with the intricate mask screamed as it closed in on him, his control over the masquerade shattered. The other masked figures fell into chaos, their facades breaking, revealing the hollow monsters they had become. Marcus pulled Isabel closer to the shattered mirror. We have to go. Now. With one last look at the carnage unfolding behind them, Isabel nodded, and together they stepped through the broken glass. But what lay on the other side was not freedom. They emerged into another ballroom, an exact replica of the one they had just left, but this one was empty. No music played, no guests danced, and yet the air was thick with a suffocating presence. The silence was more oppressive than the chaos they had escaped. The mirrors in this room were intact, but something about them was different, darker, as if they held even deeper secrets. A low, hollow voice echoed through the room. "You think you can escape?" Marcus turned, and his blood ran cold. In one of the mirrors, his own reflection stared back at him, but it wasn't him. The reflection smirked, its eyes gleaming with malice. "This is the Masquerade, Marcus. You can leave one room, but you'll only ever enter another." Isabel's hand tightened around his. "We're still trapped," she whispered, her voice cracking. "It never ends." The mirror version of Marcus grinned wider, its features slowly distorting into something monstrous. "There's always another mask," it said, stepping forward, pressing its hands against the glass. "And eventually, you'll wear it, just like everyone else." Marcus's chest tightened as the weight of their fate settled in. They had escaped the ballroom, but not the Masquerade. Blackthorn Manor was endless, a labyrinth of rooms and mirrors, each one holding another version of the nightmare, waiting to pull them deeper. From the far corner of the room, another door creaked open. A new invitation had been written, and new guests would soon arrive, unaware of the horrors awaiting them. Marcus and Isabel stood in the center of the empty ballroom, their breaths shallow, knowing that their fight had just begun. The mirrors watched them, waiting, their surfaces rippling with the promise of more nightmares. And somewhere, in the heart of Blackthorn Manor, the man with the intricate mask would return. The masquerade never ended, and neither did its curse.